And if you're going to record, Rosa, you can begin doing that.
Okay, all set.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Leatherman. I am the facilitator for the CAPE training program. And hopefully you've had the opportunity now to both complete the pre-test that we had asked that you undertake, as well as watch the first several introductory videos. The purpose of this webinar, as it is for most of the webinars coming up, is really to give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have. What I will do is I will start with a sort of a brief presentation and an overview of our upcoming training. And the question for you is whether or not you are willing and able to make a commitment to undertaking the training in good faith and care to go forward, because it certainly wouldn't be our intent to waste anybody's time if they don't feel as though they have the capacity or the inclination to do things. So anyway, what I'm going to do is, I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. Everyone, if you are on, could you please go ahead and put your video on? One of the things about the CAPE training that is a little different than some of the other webinars that maybe you're used to is that you will be part of the discussion. And so it would be very, very helpful if it is like we are in real time and in the same room. So if you guys could put your videos on, that would be really helpful to the rest of us. Thanks.
Well, actually, now as everyone is turning their video on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate the screen share function so you can see my screen, and I am going to run through a PowerPoint presentation. It should only take about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we can have the opportunity to visit, and you can ask any questions that you may have, and otherwise we can proceed from there. So what I'm going to do is actually share my my screen. Can everybody now see the PowerPoint presentation? Yes? Okay. Well, once again, the purpose of this webinar and presentation is to once again just provide an introduction and overview to what we're trying to accomplish with the CAPE project. Once again, community assessment and education to promote behavioral health planning and evaluation. And here are our project sponsors. And it's kind of obligatory to always recognize them with a project such as this. Our objectives with the training, there are really three of them. The first is to enhance behavioral health literacy, and we do so by incorporating the mental health first aid workshop. As many of you already are aware, it deals with behavioral health generally, although we are going as much as possible to try to focus on substance abuse issues that are really plaguing many of our communities. We have kind of two other objectives that are really quite important and sort of fundamental to our training program. The first of which is to foster the creation of community coalitions to address behavioral health. And to accomplish that objective, we have developed sort of a training program focusing on community capacity building. And those are the videos that we put together and will make available to you here shortly. And then the third and important objective is to discuss the notion of sustaining the initiative over the long term. And that really is a function of community planning. And for, in my own experience, really that development of a plan going forward is really kind of essential to keeping things on track for the longer term. Where we're at right now is we're at the introduction and overview webinar. From there, the notion is to undertake the mental health first aid workshop. And as I understand it, most of you have already done so. We will have another webinar where we'll sort of talk about your impressions of the mental health first aid workshop and have a discussion about community stigma reduction. Then you will have the opportunity to view the videos dealing with community capacity building. And then we'll have another webinar to discuss any of the community development issues that are on your mind, as well as talk about the notion of action planning going forward. Then what we are hoping that you will undertake is an effort to do some community action plans of your own. And I will suggest through the course of the training program, there might be one or two areas of your focus. If you do not currently have some sort of a community coalition to deal with behavioral health or substance abuse issues, I would suggest and strongly advocate the notion that such a coalition is both beneficial and needed to make significant progress on these problems. And if indeed you already have such a community coalition in place, then you might go on to perhaps a second planning initiative, which is to actually develop some sort of a action plan focusing on community drug abuse or another issue that you believe important and relevant for your own efforts. Finally, following sort of the completion of our formal program, we'll take a bit of a break. But what I'd like to do then is get back together with you in approximately 6 months' time, just to see how things are going in terms of your efforts following on to the community action planning, and perhaps offer some thoughts, ideas, and other assistance that can help keep you going forward and making progress. On your behalf, we have a number of learning objectives with the CAPE program. First, of course, is to enhance behavioral health awareness and literacy. And once again, that is through our use of the mental health first aid program. Our hope on your behalf is that it will enable you to recognize problems when you see them and know how to be helpful when you do. We would want that you would be able to identify the various types of behavioral health services and providers within your community and your region, and that you be comfortable in discussing behavioral health challenges with these local healthcare professionals. And then finally, we would hope that we will enable you to enhance your outreach capacity across all of the various types of community scale initiatives that you may choose to undertake, whether it be in relation to drug abuse, behavioral health, or what have you. I think that the kinds of capacity building skills that we are going to be discussing are kind of ubiquitous across many different community scale challenges. First, a few words about mental health first aid. In terms of enhancing behavioral health literacy, we have incorporated the mental health first aid program. And as you perhaps are already aware, it's an international training program with the application of a first aid kit for mental health. And it requires a one-day training program. There are youth, adult, and other variations of the program. And what we will be doing is utilizing the adult training with an emphasis on substance abuse disorder. Mental health first aid helps participants recognize the signs of behavioral health distress and to know what to do to be helpful when they see them. And it can help to address broader behavioral health challenges by helping to reduce the stigma associated with mental health disorders. And completion of the program provides a certification for the training participant. In terms of sort of our community development approach, we take the premise that tough community scale problems need a coalition to address them to make effective progress. And certainly community drug abuse is one of those tough community scale problems. And what we believe is that county extension can, as it often is, be a catalyst for essentially establishing such a coalition and pulling people together. But the coalition in the ideal would encompass a number of partners in that process that may include community mental health agencies, various healthcare providers, certainly public health officials, law enforcement, the judicial system, local government, and others as may be necessary. This is kind of what we see as the type of coalition that is going to be necessary if we are going to be able to make significant progress in dealing with these very, very challenging issues that we are facing. In terms of our community development training, we have a series of videos that sort of cover the gambit of community development techniques and skills. We have 4 major sections that we discuss. In turn, community needs assessment, assessing community preparedness, engaging the community and building consensus over priorities within the community, and then sustaining the initiative through community action planning. We've actually developed a sort of an action plan worksheet for your use. If indeed you've been to the Health Bench website and looked at our CAPE section, you will find it. You will find this worksheet there and other CAPE resources that we would steer you toward. This is really no different than extension planning that we're all familiar with. What we've done simply is to sort of break it into its component parts that can help you think incrementally through the challenge that you're trying to address and develop some strategies for making progress in achieving your goals. And indeed, you will find that I have already developed a couple of these action plans for you to use as samples. Riley County is my home county here in Kansas. We do have a mental health coalition, and what I have done is essentially outline for you functionally how it was brought together, how it works, and what such a community action plan for the creation and sustaining such a coalition to address mental health issues. And indeed, I believe that the coalition that we have here in Riley County, Kansas, has been very, very successful in terms of making progress in addressing mental health related issues in our own community of Manhattan, Kansas, and Riley County. Finally, toward the end of our video series, I have a presentation that deals specifically with community drug abuse strategies that can lead into the notion of you essentially identifying some action strategies on behalf of the communities that you serve. And I've developed some resources that I will steer you toward that deal with the notion of general priorities and strategies that have been employed to combat drug abuse within our communities, a discussion of best community practices in terms of the selection of those strategies. I've created some resources that summarize a number of state and community action plans. And then once again, I have created a sample action plan that you can use as a template for any of your own action plan initiatives. And this is also available on the CAPE website. This is a drug abuse action plan that I developed for myself. And you will have that available to you to use as a template for your own thinking. This whole notion of community action planning, really it takes only a few hours of dedicated effort to sort of put together a 4 or a 5-page action plan. And that is what you will find on the CAPE website that I have done on behalf of my own community, and then by making it available as a template for you to follow as you think about what you might do by way of community action planning. So here is what we are hoping you are agreeing to, and that is, first of all, to participate as much as possible in all of these sessions, to actually view the videos and do a bit of self-study on your own. And then we are asking you to complete 1 or 2 planning exercises on behalf of the communities that you serve. And to the extent that you have the capacity and the inclination, then thereafter to do something to help the communities that you serve. And so what we do not expect of anyone participating in this program is that somehow they will become a mental health expert, that they will diagnose anybody that they may encounter, that you will necessarily make behavioral health a major focus of your own program initiatives, that you will not be expected to somehow solve all of your community's behavioral health problems, nor necessarily significantly influence mental health trends in your communities. And we certainly don't want anyone to place themselves in any kind of jeopardy or in any dangerous situation. And if a person finds themselves feeling that way, our recommendation is to remove yourself from the situation immediately. We are just trying to encourage our county extension educators to try to be part of the solution on behalf of the communities in responding to some very, very challenging circumstances. So this is kind of a look ahead. If you agree to sort of stick with the program, the next step, if not already undertaken, would be the mental health first aid workshop. We'll have a webinar to discuss that training. Then there will be a series of community development videos for you to watch at your convenience. And then we will have another webinar to discuss everything that we've covered in the community development section of the training, as well as discuss community action planning going forward. Then there will be a period of time where you can actually complete 1 or perhaps 2 action plans of your own. And then we will have a webinar where you can briefly share what you would hope to accomplish in your own work. And then thereafter, we would hope that you will continue on in your efforts. And so what I intend next is that we would have an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. But while I've still got you on the PowerPoint screen, I will already point ahead and say that when we schedule our webinar next webinar to discuss the mental health first aid training and community stigma reduction, we do have a handout that we'd like you to take a look at in advance. We've got a number of scenarios that we will use as the focus of our discussion, and some other resources relating to community stigma reduction that we'd like you to have available at our webinar. Finally, I'll just simply say, here is our contact information, how to get in touch with me or Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University. And Rosa Solis will always kind of be our person in the control room, if you will. And she is our principal communications locus for the program. So what I'm going to do at this point is to end my screen share, and then we can have a bit of a discussion and answer any of the questions that you may have. So with that, I would invite anyone who has any comments or questions to offer them at this time.
Hi, John. Thank you for the introduction. I just had sort of a logistics question. 4 of us on this call are prevention coordinators, so we are technical assistance providers to 3 county offices that work in coordination with us on the Prosper project, which you may be familiar with. Do you have any insight as to how we should navigate our community action planning worksheet, as we don't work in the county?
What I would say is you decide what makes most sense for yourself. And if you are not focusing on a community-based, if you're not providing direct assistance to a given county or community, just do whatever makes sense for yourself. I am sort of presuming that most of the participants in these training programs are county-based educators, and they serve 1 or more communities within their county, some on a multi-county basis. But that is kind of the template that I have in my head when I designed this whole thing. But what I have always said is just do what makes sense for yourself. If it's not sort of my community template, if it's something else, do what makes sense for you. And if it's not drug abuse, if it's not mental health, just do what makes sense for you and your program that you believe is needed and will be beneficial for the folks that you serve going forward. And so while we do kind of have this presumption that we are going to be dealing with community-based educators, and we do have the presumption that they are going to be dealing with behavioral health generally or substance abuse specifically, that's not the case for everyone. And so just do what makes sense for yourself and try to make this a beneficial experience for you and something that can help set you up going forward to be more successful at whatever it is you're doing, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
So have any of you, early on, when we were first introducing this program some years ago, our very, very first program was sort of a joint program that incorporated folks from both Michigan and Ohio. Did any of you participate in the program at that time? Okay, I think what you're going to find, if you recall, and I recall very, very well, that turned out to be sort of a chaotic technical mess. And what we've done is we've substantially revamped the program to, I think, make it much, much more user-friendly and I think much more beneficial by way of its instructional quality. And so I think that you will have the opportunity to get much more out of the program, even if you've done it previously. But fundamentally, this this training program is about community capacity building. That's what we do in Extension. And perhaps very few of us sort of came up through the ranks with a mental health expertise in our background. Most of us have focused on something else. But what is sort of ubiquitous across Extension is this notion of helping communities to improve their relative circumstance, getting from point A to point B, and helping them as much as possible to do so. And sometimes we do that literally at a community scale. Sometimes we do it one person, one producer, one family at a time. But nonetheless, I think that the one strength that we have here in Extension is that sort of this notion of community capacity building, community development is kind of endemic to what we do and ubiquitous across all of our program areas. And the whole notion with this is we are dealing with a very, very difficult problem, particularly in response to drug abuse that is ravaging so many communities. And our thinking is, what do we have to contribute to the solution of those problems, or to at least the improvement of the relative situation that exists? And so what I am sort of doing is trying to utilize the strengths that we have to contribute in a way that can potentially make sense and help. And so that is kind of the premise of our program. Once again, we do not expect anybody to somehow morph into a mental health expert or a healthcare expert, but rather to just really bring the kind of strengths and capacities that we are familiar with and that we've been trained to be able to apply to our community challenges, and that we have otherwise learned over the course of experience and years in trying to accomplish our various projects. And so that is really the notion behind this, is what do we within the University Extension Service have to contribute to trying to resolve these very, very challenging problems that exist. And so that is kind of the premise behind our program. I think that by incorporating the mental health first aid training, we actually offer a very useful and valuable kind of a training and level of insight with regard to mental health issues and challenges. But once again, what we are doing is really calling on what I perceive as a core strength of the University Extension Network, and trying to potentially bring it to bear to help our communities to improve their relative circumstance, which for many these days, and particularly as I see it in Ohio, is a very, very difficult kind of a circumstance. And so my hope is that you are indeed on board with the training, that you actually apply yourself and try to get the most out of it. As with any training, we kind of take from it what we put into it. And that is the whole notion with the CAPE training program being sort of an adult distance training program where you really are kind of on your own. But once again, to the extent that you do, I think, take advantage of the resources that we've put together for you, and you apply yourself and you think about these things a little bit, I think that you will have an opportunity, I think, to gain a lot from this training program. So I guess that's that is kind of what I wanted to convey during this webinar. If there are no other questions, I really don't need to rattle on. I'll just pause for a moment. If anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to offer, I'd invite you to do so now. Well, with that, then, I will thank you all for being here this afternoon. I hope to see you back again at our next webinars. But the next step will be, what we're going to have to do is we've kind of run into some scheduling problems that just came up of late, and we are still in the process of trying to figure out specifically when various kinds of webinars will be available. We will communicate with you via email when we have opened up the next group of videos, and we'll communicate with you a schedule for our upcoming webinars. Hopefully that will work for most of you. And so watch for an email from Rosa with some additional instructions that will be forthcoming here within the next week or so. And otherwise, I would encourage you to contact me should you have any questions at all about the training, or if you would like to discuss any of your thoughts or ideas and would like to solicit my input and perspective. I'll try to help you in any way I can as we go forward with this process. So once again, thank you, and please do stay in touch, and I will see you again soon.